Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nigel Grier from Grier and Associates. Today we're speaking with Guy Lane, the founder of Vita Sapien. Guy has been working at the forefront of ecological sustainability and the LifeWise philosophy for many years now. His work has helped shape a vision of how humanity can live wisely on this planet. The purpose of today's conversation is simple. We want to explore the mission of Vita Sapien, understand the progress made so far, and look ahead to the next iteration of the project. In October, Guy and Vita will be raising funds to take this work to the next level. Today's discussion is about setting the stage for that. I'll be asking Guy a series of questions that draw out the vision, the story, and the specific opportunities this next chapter presents. Guy, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nigel. Really appreciate you taking the time.
To begin, can you tell us in one sentence what Vita Sapien stands for?
So Vita Sapien has got three core tenets, which are that we ought to have a deep love and reverence for nature. We ought to trust science, and we ought to be in action to make things better. That's at the very heart of the philosophy, if it were to be distilled down into three little points.
Okay. What challenge is Vita Sapien solving, and why is it urgent now?
So fundamentally, Vita Sapien is a quite an extraordinary organization because its specific task is to prevent the collapse of the global ecosystem and ultimately to create a safe operating space on planet Earth for humans to live on this planet for potentially tens and hundreds of millions of years. If we can simply get through the Anthropocene crisis, which is the modern crisis over the last 80 years, in which the humans are the main drivers of change in the climate and environment on the planet. And ultimately, what we've identified is a key opportunity that could actually create the space for us to resolve the Anthropocene crisis within a single generation. And at the heart of the work is the fusion of the science and the spiritual, which is itself a pretty radical proposition, because in the Western world over the last 3,000 years or so, there's been this narrative that science and spirituality are sort of two different things and never the twain shall meet, where in reality, they were never separated in the first place. And so we're trying to bring environmental science and ecological spirituality. Environmental science gives us a pathway to know what to do, and ecological spirituality gives us a powerful motivation to actually do it.
Interesting. So how is Vita Sapien different from other sustainability initiatives?
Well, if one were to make a sort of broad brush statement about environmental organizations, firstly, they would tend to be either on the ground doing things like tree planting, litter cleanups, and so forth. So Vita Sapien is actually more of it's grounded around a philosophy. So Vita Sapien's mission is more to do with simply communicating the philosophy. We will be involved in, on the ground activities, but the core business of Vita Sapien is to communicate the Vita Sapien philosophy. And secondly, a lot of organizations, environmental organizations that are focused on information are quite often wholly focused on education, teaching people. And so, but what we've noticed, and not noticed, and this has been abundantly clear for a long time, is that teaching people things doesn't motivate behavior change. Teaching people that climate change is bad doesn't motivate people to do what's necessary to resolve climate change. And this is the really important and fundamental aspect of Vita's work, is to identify this issue around beliefs. The people are motivated by what they believe much more so than what they know. And so this is why Vita's work is really focused in the realm of bringing the environmental science into the space with the beliefs that life on Earth is sacred and ought to be protected because it's the right thing to do, which is a different argument that we should protect the environment for rational reasons, because otherwise X, Y, and Z will happen. When we bring caring for the planet as a spiritual quest, then we open up the greatest reservoir of power in the human beings.
Interesting. And I understand you've been at this now with Vita for probably close to a decade. In that time, what key milestones have been achieved so far?
So the idea was conceived just a few weeks more than 9 years ago. That's when I had the first conception. And in the first conception, it was that we need a religion devoted to Gaia, to Mother Nature. And so we went down that path over a number of years, and we actually got that. We got a registered religious institution with the living planet as the object of devotion. But what we found very quickly, or soon after getting all that paperwork through and then sort of sharing this widely with people, is that religious people already had a religion, and non-religious people weren't looking for a religion in the first place. So we basically created something that wasn't in demand. It's what I refer to as the oyster ice cream. You could technically have an oyster ice cream, but nobody's going to want to eat it. And then what we realized also was that religion was a too narrow framing, because ultimately people's beliefs are spread across a whole spectrum of different frames. And these are best described under the frame worldview, which is why our little pocketbook that introduces Vita Sapien philosophy is called Vita Worldview. And so a worldview is basically this overarching idea that includes one's religion, one's spirituality, which can be very different from religion, one's culture, one's personal experiences, one's family experience, and so forth. And so within a person's worldview, some aspects of worldview can't really be changed because they're grounded in past experience, but other aspects of the worldview can be changed, particularly in relation to how people see themselves with respect to life on Earth. So this is a long way of saying that basically we've gone through this progression from the original conception of the idea to a point now where we've got a philosophy which is very rich and deep and well thought through and grounded and tested in many, many conversations. We've got the pocketbook, which I started writing in 2022. That's had an iterative update every 6 months or so. That is now in a really strong position. So we've got the key communications material that we need to tell our story. We also now have Vita TV running, which is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week live streaming television channel, which you can see through vitatv.org website. That's basically presently running on content that I've developed over the last 5 years or so. We've also established ourselves in the United Nations. We've got 3 applications underway, one of which has been approved. So Vita Sapien is a registered observer organization for the Convention for Biological Diversity that has COPs every 2 years. Our intention would be to attend the biodiversity COPs. I'll explain why in a minute. We've also applied to become observers at the climate COPs, and that has their COPs every year. We want to attend all the climate COPs with a pavilion and a bunch of people. And we're also applied under ECOSOC, which is the United Nations Environmental Social Council, which basically gives Vita Sapien access to the core of the United Nations process. So all of these things have been built up over the years. We've got several thousands of people in our social networks and databases and so forth. And fundamentally, what we've done over the 9 years is to start with an idea and then to build the bones of an institution with all of the pieces that we need have all been mapped out and thought through. And now we just need to put the flesh on the bones. A couple of other things. We have this, this is the Quen pendant. This is our sort of standard piece of jewelry, so we can sell these to fundraise. And also it's an environmental symbol that is at the very heart of the Vita philosophy. And when you wear these things, you quite often get people inquire after them. And it's a good way to actually start a conversation. So we've got the whole tooling and production process for this, and other merchandise, which is an important part of any organization as a way of just getting the brand out. So we've got the skeleton, we've got everything's all mapped out. We just need the resources to actually put the flesh on the bones and really start reaching out to the 53 million people who we believe are already in this headspace, but they haven't yet actually heard Vita Sapien philosophy.
So based on that, it sounds like you're really building a community. You already have a few thousand people within your community, and that you're targeting an ultimate community of 53 million. Is that correct?
So the 53 million is the idea of it's about 8% of Western adults share the characteristic that we refer to as Vitan, which is to say that they have this deep love and reverence for nature that they may or may not refer to as spiritual. Secondly, they trust science. And thirdly, they're in action. So we think there's around 8% of Western adults fit that definition. And we believe that those are the people that will resonate with Vita Sapien philosophy and start to identify with the idea. And so that is really the sort of the first tranche, if you like. So 8%. And that, if we can enroll the 53 million people into Vita, that's a very significant political and economic force. And the reason why we want to have them involved with Vita is that amongst those people, and this comes from me spending hundreds of hours of my life talking to people that have these characteristics, is that there's no unifying philosophy amongst them. And if you ask them a simple question such as how long will sustainability last, or how long could the humans live on planet Earth, nobody's really gone through the thinking deeply about these things to actually come up with a fully rounded cosmovision and a big picture of where the humans fit in, and ultimately what the opportunities are. And there's also a lot of ideas out there that simply don't make a lot of sense. Like even in very educated, environmentally minded people will still talk about other planets as though other planets can actually help us in dealing with the climate and ecological crisis. So Vita Sapien philosophy really just helps people that are in this space to basically get the best thinking and feeling to unify them and get the power of the numbers of these people.
So look, based on your work today, can you share one or two impact stories that sort of bring the project to life?
Yeah, well, actually, Nick, who's one of our directors, is a pretty classic example. Nick and I traveled to Montreal in 2022 to attend the CBD Convention for Biological Diversity, COP15. That was their 15th big gathering of environment ministers and the like, and they signed off on an agreement amongst the world leaders, the relationship between humans and the biosphere over the coming decade. And Nick had an interview with Paul Beckwith from the Climate Emergency Forum, and was asked basically about Vita. And the way that Nick described Vita, I think really actually struck a chord with me, because he really nailed it, in my view. He said that he was a spiritual person, by which I mean he was somebody for whom he was, thought about spirituality and sought to practice it. But he says, and he loved nature, all right? But he'd never come across a religion or a spiritual philosophy that actually resonated with him until he came across the work of Vita Sapien. And it's because of this fusion of the environmental science and the ecological spirituality that we actually attracted Nick's attention. And it was because of that he made the commitment to come on board as a director.
Okay, interesting. So apart from Nick, who has already supported Vita, and why?
So we've got lots of little bits of support. So I've got my associate David in Brisbane recently threw some money into the tin for us to buy a carton full of Vita pocketbooks. So we had 40 books. And so we've been basically, we give the books away when we meet people that we think will be interested in the narrative, which is a good way to get the message out, except that it requires a constant stream of money coming in. We've got other people that have supported to the tune of thousands of dollars our efforts to actually get to these international events. And so I did a trip to France in 2022 to a 4-week eco-spiritual retreat. And so we've got support from other people to get me there. That was extremely valuable, a big insight into sort of mainstream. There's no eco-spirituality in the mainstream, but when you're in the eco-spirituality subsector, if you like, then you start to see what's in that space. And I think Vita Sapien really comes in with a very fresh new perspective. And so in a way, what I'm saying is that, you know, the small amounts of support that we've had, the few thousands of dollars that we've had, we've been able to really leverage and get a great deal of value out of.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned your friend David in Brisbane earlier. Is that David Hood?
That's David Hood, yeah.
Yeah, and David, he's a past president of Engineers Australia, if I
David is an extraordinary human being in that he is a very senior engineer. He's got a very long list of post-noms, and but he's also very passionate about the environment. And in this phase of his life, he spends a lot of time doing on the ground street activism. And so you'll often see David with a placard, sometimes marching into banks, marching into, you know, financial institutions. Yeah, and so he's been a supporter of. David's been involved with Vita, or David's been aware of Vita, if you like, right from the very beginning. In fact, Vita was actually the original day that it began, which was the 18th of August 2016, about 2:30 in the afternoon, which is when I wrote an essay saying that we need a religion devoted to Mother Nature. And I posted that on LinkedIn. That was actually, I wrote that in a little office that he had in QUT when he was an adjunct professor there, and I was a master's student. So David's been, you know, associated with this project for a long time. We also have a lot of people that come to our events. I say a lot. We're not talking about thousands, but we routinely get a dozen people show up to our moon parties, and David's almost, you know, invariably shows up to the moon parties.
So do you have any other co-founders in Vita?
So the organization is it's a registered charity. We have 3 directors. So that's myself, Nick, and Bill, who's been with the project from the beginning. And Nick came on board in 2022. I say the beginning, so we founded the organization in 2020. And so Bill Spee, who's in Sydney, is one of the other directors. There were 2 other directors before then. So that's at the heart of the organization at the moment. And ultimately, if we can start getting the resources to grow the organization, then we'd be in a position where we look at increasing the board members and committees and, you know, a bigger structure to accommodate a greater workflow.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously we've sort of heard about, you know, Vita and where we've got to today and the various milestones that you've achieved in your collateral and your products. What is the focus of this next iteration then?
Well, just to, you know, use the analogy of the skeleton, we've got the skeleton, we need to put the flesh on the bones. And ultimately, so with Vita TV, for example, we need to start producing more high quality content to feed into that 24-hour-a-day live stream. And for that, we need to have a proper space. I mean, technically, you could say that we've got a little film studio, but if it's a tiny little space and we share that with people that fix lawnmowers, and we've got the bones of everything, but we can't function properly, and because everything that we've got is just too small and just not properly sized for what we want to do. So we need to have a proper studio, but a proper film studio needn't be like a massive, super expensive thing. It just needs a decent sized, dedicated room, properly soundproofed, that we know that we're not going to have to share the space with We need the workspace for a multiple of people, and we need the resources. So the idea of the United Nations efforts are simply this. So with the COPs, for example, so we hold that there's around 8% of Western adults hold these characteristics called Vetan. If you go onto a busy high street and talk to people, then around about 8% of those people will be resonant with what we're doing. However, if you go to a climate COP, then probably around 90% of those people will be resonant, because the climate COPs select for people who have Vetan characteristics. Now I got to COP28 in Dubai, which is a really important climate COP to get to, because that was the first one run by an oil man. But I only got there under somebody else's banner, and just with me and no resources. What we need is to get to these COPs and to actually hire a pavilion and have 2 people there throughout the whole day to meet people, share the booklets, and have the conversations. But to do that requires a chunk of change. It costs money to fly these people and get the hotels and the transfers and all the collateral. So that's really where we're up to at the moment. Like I say, we've got the bones, so we've got the access to the United Nations, but we don't have the resources to actually make full advantage of that. We've sort of got a studio, but we don't have a proper studio that actually allows us to put out a whole bunch of good quality content. We don't have the resources to outsource a lot of, for example, the post-processing and so forth. So we've built the infrastructure, but we don't have the resources to scale. And ultimately, this is a game of enrolling 53 million people really as quickly as we can, because the important thing to understand about this climate and ecological crisis is just how far down the road we are. And this organization was not conceived to grow slowly or organically like most organizations would do. This was designed to create the infrastructure and then to get fully funded so it could grow rapidly, that we could bring these people on board this philosophy as soon as possible, because as soon as we get these people on board the philosophy, the sooner we start to see the behavioral change that is necessary to actually turn the ship.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you really wanted to professionalize what you've been doing to date and sort of take it out of the bootstrapping into something a little bit more comfortable, and hopefully something with sustainable economics going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. So right now we get by on the smell of a oily rag, and what we're trying to do with this budget that we're talking about over 12 months is to establish Vita so that it can find its own cash flow, so it doesn't need to bring money in from the outside. And ultimately that comes through the sale of goods and services. As we enroll more people that take an interest in our message, then they will be interested to purchase, for example, the Quen pendants, the various other merchandise products, guided meditations that we've got a few of and a few underway, pocketbooks, and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of goods and services that we can sell in order to generate the revenue, in order to help us continue to enroll people into this philosophy. But to actually kick off, that's where we need some help from the outside to get up to that point.
Yeah. So on that basis, you mentioned the budget. How much are you looking to raise in October, and what will these funds enable?
So we're looking to raise $150,000, and fundamentally that will ensure that we have got a clear run over the period of 12 months to basically ensure that everything that needs to be paid for is paid for, that we've got access to the studio space so that we can start producing a much higher quality and quantity of content that tells our message. And we do this through a variety of video formats, like just interviews like this one are really valuable. Sort of sermons where, for example, myself or somebody else will just speak for, say, 25 minutes on certain Vita Sapien themes. We've got a series called Vita Vista, which is basically like these little 10-minute vistas of oceans with waves rolling on beaches, and we pick these up from around Australia. We've got these things all down the East Coast, so we can have more of those. And again, these are the sorts of things that could actually be sold as like little DVD packs. So really, we get to take the bones of what we've got now and actually really professionalize it. Also, we've got resources in there to work with professional branding people. At the moment, all of the work around branding and graphic design has been done by myself. And I'm only like the Paddy principle applies here. I've reached the level of my abilities in terms of branding. We need specialists. So a part of that $150,000 goes towards branding professionals. And they'll also be working with us to generate what they're calling a MVP, a minimum viable product. So a small package of goods and services that will actually go out for sale as the core cash flow for the organization. So we'll be able to put all of this together over the period of 12 months. And hopefully within that 12 months, as the plan is that we will start generating revenue internally that we can then use for the continued growth. And because we're a registered charity, we'll also have other fundraising calls for specific projects, which will enhance even further growth.
Yeah. Okay. So on that basis, what does success look like at the end of this round?
At the end of the 12 months after the funding comes in?
Yes. Yeah. After you've raised and expended the 150,000.
I think that after that time, we'll be in a situation where there will be sufficient income to Vita Sapien to allow us to continue growing on our own, which is fundamentally important for an organization. It needs to have a sustainable income stream. And that income stream, like I say, will come from the sale of goods and services, but also regular donations and subscriptions and so forth. We'll have a bunch more pocketbooks available, really professionally laid out, explaining very important key themes around the Vita Sapien philosophy. We'll have oodles of really high quality video content that will have gone out through Vita TV and be available. We'll have all of the branding will be consistent across, which is extremely important for any organization. Just to highlight that, so over the years, this has progressed in the naming of the organization. And so I refer to Vita Sapien philosophy. The little booklet is called Vita Worldview. And we also refer to LifeWise philosophy. And for some people, that's all a bit confusing, even though Vita Sapien is Latin for LifeWise. And so we'll resolve all of these sort of branding issues, which have not huge problems, but in resolving these names and getting the icons established, it just makes the organization just seem even more powerful than it is. And remember also, for an organization that gets by on a smell of an oily rag, we've got a 24-hour TV channel. We attend the United Nations events. We've got our own little book. It's pretty foundational stuff. And if you imagine what that would look like after we're properly funded for 12 months, it's just going to be a much more professional and engaging organization for people to get involved with.
Sure. So probably a little bit of a personal question now. What was the turning point that led you to this work?
So I have a deep, I didn't know this until that event around August 2016. I'd never really thought much about spirituality, but what I came to understand was, so where it started was the encyclical. So Pope Francis put out this papal teaching saying that it was sinful to kill the planet, right? And I was really excited when that came out in 2015 because it seemed like this institution, the Catholic Church, is like nearly 1 billion people, and it's sort of like the Pope is a bit like the king in a way. It's a very hierarchical institution, and so when the when the big boss says, hey, we're going to go green, I'm like, wow, that's 1 billion people are going green. Like that's transformative, you know. That's 1/8 of the world's population is following this spiritual philosophy, and now they're going to actually become a sustainable institution. I'm like, great, right? And then a year later, I realized that that's not really how the world works. It's an institution that's foundational documents predate the scientific revolution. They predate, it's pre-medieval, their foundational documents. And they've got a history of, that is a long way from caring for the environment, Indigenous and women. And so what I realized back then, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, was that the mainstream religions were fundamentally ecologically unsustainable because they don't teach environmental science and transition, and that we're all part of this beautiful living planet. They teach something else. And when I started to look around the world of spirituality at the different religions and then New Age spirituality, looking for answers for the climate and ecological crisis in that institution called spirituality, you realize that there's very little in the institution of spirituality that's actually useful. And that was really my insight, was that there was this thing called spirituality that I didn't know much about. But as I started to research it, I realized that I was actually a very spiritual person myself, with respect to my love and reverence for nature. And I think back now to certain instances that were transformative in my life that I didn't realize at the time, but I look back upon now. And there was two in particular. One was when I was in the oil industry at age 22, and I was standing on the bow of a ship, the Karen Bravo. We've been working around Taiwan, and we're steaming back to Singapore. And we were 10 miles off the coast, and I was looking down, I was resting on the bow of the boat, and I was looking down, and there was just plastic bag after plastic bag after plastic bag coming past. And I realized I didn't know anything about plastics. I could explain in full detail why they're terrible for the environment now, but I didn't know that back then because I hadn't done an environmental science degree, but I knew it was wrong. Okay. And then another instance, some years later, I've got a sailing boat now, and I'm sailing up the East Coast. And I had this experience. I left Burnett River on my yacht heading up to 1770. And it was a beautiful cloudless night in the middle of Milky Way season. The star field was extraordinary. And I was accompanied on my journey by a brown booby bird that sat on the bow of the boat and put its head under its wing and went to sleep. And I was the guardian of the brown booby bird. And I realized, I came to realize later on that I have a deep, deep love and reverence for life on Earth. And that I realized that, I have a deep eco-spirituality. And that's what I realized was missing, was this fusion of the environmental science that helps us understand what we need to do, and the eco-spirituality, which is the motivation to get out there and follow that environmental science to protect nature. And so that's sort of why I think there's a lot of other reasons as to why I've come to do this work, or why I have been, if you like, the best athlete to do this work. But fundamentally, it's that passion and drive. And also as an environmental scientist, because I speak to world-leading scientists through some of my online interviews. And when you talk to people like Paul Ehrlich, who's an evolutionary biologist, or Peter Wadhams, who's a polar researcher, and these people have got deep understanding of how the Earth system functions, they're shaking their head and they're going, how the hell do we get out of this mess? And what I've realized is that if you can create saving the planet as a spiritual quest, and you can get that into the hearts and minds of 50 million people, that's how you fix the mess.
Interesting. So it's a great lead into my next question, which is, assuming we're in October and you're pitching to potential funders, if a funder asks why you, how will you answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And ultimately, that why you is, why should we give you your institution the money? Well, there's nothing like Vita Sapien. Okay, there's no shortage of environmental organizations, but I cannot think of one that's a registered charity that's actually fused the environmental science with the ecological spirituality, and that is fundamental to our mission. And that comes down to this what I call the Vita hypothesis. I can talk about that, but it's basically it's a theory that when you bring the science and the spirituality together, you create a much more powerful human being in terms of like protecting the interests of the living planet. Why me? Well, ultimately, I'm at the moment, I'm leading the organization, but at some point in the future, when we got the resources, I want to go off and do other things and let other people run the organization. So why me? I guess is because I'm the best athlete at the moment for the job. So there's your answer there.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's been great, Guy. That's been quite comprehensive. Now, we've heard today about Vita Sapien's mission, the urgency of its work, and the progress already made. We've also looked ahead to the October fundraising round, which will enable the next stage of this important journey. Guy, thank you for sharing your vision with you and your story with us today. To everyone watching, this is the moment to get involved. We'll be in touch as we move towards the October raise. Thank you all and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Guy.